Hello and welcome once again to I Like Motorbikes. Thanks very much for joining me. My name is Tom and today we're in a glorious Somerset and we're here with this fantastic Honda CB500S. Why? Well, it's to make sure that you know what you're looking for when you go and buy a used motorcycle. With this guide you can make sure you end up buying a Moto Guzzi Lemon and not a Moto Guzzi Lemon. Let's give it a go.
A is for Advert. These two Yamaha R1s look very similar on paper, but as you can see, one advert has very little information and the other includes a lot more information. The advert is what's going to make you decide to go and buy a bike and spend your hard-earned money. The one with the more information is going to leave you asking less questions later on.
B is for brakes and bearings. First off, for checking the brakes, do a stationary check. You want to look at it whilst it's here. Now for disc brakes, it's pretty easy. You're going to be looking along where the holes are in the discs if they're vented, and most are, and just take a little look, make sure there's no cracks or anything like that in there. Next, take your fingers like this, or finger and thumb I should say, and just run them over the disc like that. If the disc is any good, it'll be completely smooth and you won't feel anything. If it's bad, it'll be really ridged and bumpy, and particularly when you get to that top bit, you'll feel quite a pronounced lip. If that's the case, you're going to want to budget for some brakes. Drum brakes are a little bit different because you can't really inspect them. What you do want to do is just check, do they work? You can do that stationary, and then hopefully if you take it for a test ride you'll find that out as well. But also look at how much adjustment is left either in the cable or in the brake bar, depends which setup it is. That'll be a pretty clear indicator of how much brakes there are left. Likewise with disc brakes, get yourself a torch. Most smartphones now have a torch functionality, and just shine it in and around the caliper so you can see how much pad material is left. Bearings. This one's a little bit more difficult. For wheel bearings, it's easier if you've got two people, so hopefully the seller will help you with this. But if you turn the wheel all the way to one side, or the rear wheel you obviously don't have to worry about, and you want to grab the wheel at either 12 and 6 or probably 3 and 9 realistically, and just give it a little wiggle. If all you can feel is moving the bars or whatever else, then bearings are pretty good. If there's any play in there, that'll be the bearings and you'll feel that. Again, budget for those. For the rest of the bearings, it gets a bit more difficult to check. For steering head bearings, you're going to want to hopefully have the bike on a centre stand or something like that. You can do it just by sat on the bike. So if you sat on the bike like this, you can get a good idea. And you want to turn the bars left to right nice and slowly. If it's in the air, it's even better because you can feel just whether there's any notches, there's any play that there shouldn't be. If you put the bars to one side ever so slightly, the wheel should drop on its own, and same like what, well, I think I'm a little bit of a slant here, but the point is everything moves really freely. It's not tight, it's not stiff to move. Head bearings are pretty good on this bike in particular. Another way to check is just hold the front brake solid, and just when it can't move, just check there's no play and you are just compressing the suspension, because that can give a little knock and it's an indication that the head bearings are on their way out. Once you've checked all the bearings at the front, make your way to the rear. Do the same with the rear disc as you did with the front if it has a rear disc. But then it gets a little bit more complex with checking the swing arm bearings. Now this is predominantly for off-road bikes as they tend to eat swing arm bearings more than road bikes do, but it's still a worthwhile check, especially if the mileage is a little bit higher. The way to do it, and it's again a bit tricky on your own, is you'd want to keep the bike completely steady and just try and lift, so my hand is under the swinging arm, try and lift up, can't really do it this side but you can see, try and lift up, so you're trying to compress the suspension, and likewise try and move side to side. But as you can see, I'm just moving the bike, so it means they're pretty bob on. C is for chain and sprockets. The first thing I always check when I go to buy a bike, particularly with the chain and sprockets, is can I pull the chain off the rear sprocket at all? This is a pretty good indicator of the chain life. So if you grab the sprocket of the chain just like that with your thumb and forefinger again, and just try and pull it clear of the rear sprocket. If you can pull it more than half a tooth, or expose more than half a tooth or a whole tooth, it's a pretty sure sign that either the chain is completely slack or it's on its way out. It's going to need changing very, very soon. The next thing you want to do, if you've got a centre stand, this is perfect, or if there's a paddock stand available, is spin the wheel round and check in the chain. Are there any tight links? Is there anything that looks rusty or untoward? I mean, this one's covered in a crap chain lube, but besides that, it's pretty alright. Sprockets, it's a bit harder to check because most front sprockets are covered and you can't see them, but the rear sprocket particularly, you're going to look at it and make sure that the profile of the tooth is nice and sharp, a nice and sharp angle. If it's getting curled or hooked over, or it looks quite small, then it's a pretty sure sign. Again, it's on its way out. You're going to change chain of sprockets as a kit. Make sure you budget for that. D is for details. This is the point where you're going to find out more about the bike. Ask the owner some questions. How long have they owned it? What sort of riding have they done with it? Have they ever had any problems with the bike? How has it been serviced? Have they got service history? And don't be afraid to ask for proof of that. Also, make sure you ask them, has it ever been a write-off? Has it ever been stolen? These sort of questions. If they don't know the answer, fair enough, but make sure you ask anyway. You're there to get information to make you happy, to make sure you don't buy a bad bike. Ask away. E is for engine and clutch and gearbox, but mostly engine. This is the point you're going to want to check whether it starts and runs okay. Particularly, does it start from cold? Make sure the seller hasn't done you a dummy and make sure the engine's cold. So put your hand on the engine. Does it feel nice and cold? You want to know what it's like from a cold start. If the engine's already hot when you get there, it raises alarm bells because it might have a cold start issue that they're hiding by only showing you the bike hot. Once you've covered that point, it's your turn. Turn the ignition, put the choke on and check it starts and runs. You want to look out for any unknowing knocks, bangs, rattles. Does it idle smoothly? It wants to be a continuous note, not revving up and down and hunting. That's what it's called, hunting at idle. So going, oh. You're not looking for that. It just wants to be a steady state. Once you've got it running, hopefully the seller will let you take it for a short test ride, or ideally, if not, they'll ride up and down on the street to prove that it works. This is where you want to check the gearbox. Select all the gears that you can. Make sure you pull away cleanly in first, the clutch is okay. Make sure you put it in a high gear as well, and you give it some revs in that high gear. So you really want to labour the engine. This is the point where you will slip the clutch if the clutch is on its way out. If it does slip, again, you're going to need to budget for that. It's not a particularly bad job, but it does cost some money. Gearbox, when you apply load, you want to make sure it's not dropping out of gear or anything untoward. It's not knocking, clattering, banging. Really the same with the engine. You don't want to hear anything that you don't recognise. Let's start this up and see what it sounds like. Do you hear that, where it's picking up and it's just hunting ever so slightly, but it's not too bad. F is for forks and shocks. With the forks, you want to take your finger and thumb again and just run it up and down the fork leg itself. Make sure there's no oily residue. If there is, it's an indicator that the fork seals are gone. You're going to need to replace them. Again, it's not too costly a job, but it's something to be aware of. You also want to look out for, if it's not currently leaking, just make sure up and down the stanchion there's no little rough spots. Any rough spots caused by any stone chips, or even if there's rust or anything on there, usually because there's been a stone chip and it's knocked the chroming off and then it's been allowed to rust underneath, that's a sure sign that if it's not leaking now, it's going to in the near future, and you're going to need to replace the fork legs. Just something to be aware of. Onto the shocks. With the rear shocks, you're in a similar boat really. Most rear shocks have some kind of oil damping available to them, and again, you're just looking for any oil leaking out of them. That's the main thing. If it's a single or mono shock as they call it, it will particularly be under the bike. They get a bit of a hammering from dirt and everything. If it's dirty, it's a bit of an indication of how the bike's been kept. But again, you're looking for, on the real shiny piece in here, which is the damper rod, you want to make sure there's no oil leaking on that, and there's also no dings, marks, anything like that on it that indicates that you're going to have a problem in the near future. G is for get on your hands and knees. This is where you're going to have a good look around the bike, particularly check the tyres. You're looking for any marks, any cuts in the tyre, you know, does it have good tread? There's usual tread wear indicators. It's pretty obvious, as the name suggests. If the tread is as close to that, then it means the tyre's going to need changing. You want to make sure you've got a good few millimeters in there, and as well, look in and around the bike. If you look under the bike, that doesn't get cleaned very often. It's going to tell you how this person's looked after the bike. If it's caked in filth and oil spills and all the rest of it, then you know it's had a pretty hard life and you're going to be having problems. H is for how does the owner come across. If they're trying to pressure you and tell you, this is a great bike, come on, why don't you buy it? Why aren't you buying my bike? How much do you want to pay for it? And all these sort of things, probably means they're trying to get a lemon off their hands and make it your problem. However, if they're sitting back, they've chucked you the keys, they've gone back inside, or they're just sat back and letting you do your thing, it's a surefire way that they know that the bike is going to speak for themselves and there's not any problems that they're trying to hide or trying to distract you from. So keep your wits about you. Get a good feeling from them, probably all right. If you get a bad feeling from them and you feel a little bit uncomfortable, go with your gut, walk away from the bike. I is for investigate. This bit you should do before you even go and see the bike. Get on Google and find out what are the common problems on the bikes you're going to look at. What are the main faults? How do you find them? How do you test them? For example, most Hondas of about 90s and early noughties vintage suffer with regulator rectifier failures. Easy way to check, start the engine up, turn the lights on and see whether they flicker or not while the engine's running. The proper check is take a multimeter, of course, but that's just a few second check. Get yourself on Google, do a load of investigating, make sure you know what you're going to look for when you go and find this bike. J is for justify. This is the point where, having looked around all of the bike and worked things out on what needs work and what doesn't and all those sort of things, this is where you justify to yourself, is the bike you're looking at and stood in front of worth the asking price, and is it the bike you want? If it's exactly as it's been described and it's the right money, you know you're going to be happy to pay it. But if it needs the forks doing, and if it needs tyres putting on it and whatever else, you need to justify yourself, can I get this bike cheap enough to offset the cost and time effort of me getting those things sorted? It's the bit where you do all the mental maths up here to say, well, this is £200 and that's £150 and this is that, and it's going to take me 2 weekends worth of work or getting it booked into a garage. And that's where you go into your negotiations with a plan of, well, it's up for £1,000, I've got to at least get it for 700 to make it worthwhile doing all those bits and bobs. A bonus top tip for negotiation is always go further below what you're willing to pay when you start the negotiation. For example, if the bike's up at £1,000 and you're happy to pay 900, don't offer them £900 first off. Go far down as, I don't know, £750, £800. The reason being, if they reject your first offer, you can always come up. But you might find out that if you offer £750, they say 800, and you save yourself £100 over what you were prepared to pay. Some more top tips. If you're in the UK, ask for the registration number before you even go and view the bike. This way you can do some checks online. You can do a HPI check, which will tell you if it's been stolen or if it's a write-off and any of those sort of details, but also you can check on the MOT history check to see, is the mileage accurate? Are they lying to you, or are there any issues? Did the mileage go back 10,000 miles, then forward, and all these sort of things. You get an idea of what you could be getting into before you've even jumped in the car to go and have a look. Another good tip, do your research on the bike, like I said, before you go and view it. Have a look for how much they've sold for. eBay sold listings is an absolute cracker for this. Go on there, look at the bike that you're going to go and view, and click on the sold listings for those bikes to see what they've actually sold for. If you found a bike that sold for £500 more than the one you're going to look at, you know it's either got a load of problems or you're about to get an absolute bargain. However, if it's the opposite and this person is listing a bike £1,000 over what anything else has ever sold for, you know it's probably not going to be the one for you, or it's an absolute minter and you're never going to have any problems. It goes both ways, but it pays to check and go in with both eyes wide open. Also, for any little problems or niggles, get yourself on owners groups, on forums, on Facebook. All these sort of places are an absolute goldmine for finding out information on whatever you're going to buy. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video and I hope you've learnt something. If you have learnt something or it's made you go and buy a bike, please let me know in the comments below. I'd really enjoy it. Thanks again, and I hope you're looking forward to the next video. Cheers, ride safe. Beep, beep. F is for oh no. What was I saying? D is for details or some shit. Don't know who I'm talking to, there's no one here. I think. Is that good enough?